back, I recall Duncan Littlefair saying he had hopes that Fountain Street Church would be a beacon for progressive religion far and wide. Neither he nor I had any idea then that Fountain Street's beacon would shine even to the foothills of Mount Everest. You see, Answer started right here in Fountain Street Church 17 years ago. And now it includes hundreds of sponsors in dozens of churches all across America, even in Canada and in England. Today, nearly 700 children, all highly disadvantaged and mostly low caste, are being educated, obtaining degrees and professional careers. For years, all of you, through the Social Action Committee and your weekly donations, have become part of this beacon. Many of you are personally sponsoring these students. Even the Fountain Clubbers are sponsoring a student. I can't express to you my gratitude enough. But today I am back again to thank you and reunite with you and celebrate with you. You see, this afternoon at the Hindu Temple of West Michigan in Ada, from 3:30 to 5:30, Answer is holding its annual concert benefit featuring David Hall, the Grand Rapids Symphony Marimba Man. In addition, there will be Nepali food, music, dance, and best of all, we have produced a video for the first time introducing our office staff and explaining what all is involved. Please come if you can, and if not, talk with Jane and me in the social hall after the service. Again, we are deeply grateful. Dhanyabad.
That very popular poet, because she's very good, Mary Oliver, wrote these lines. Every morning the world is created. I'll repeat that. Every morning the world is created. Under the orange sticks of the sun, the heaped ashes of the night turn into leaves again and fasten themselves to the high branches, and the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies. If it is your nature to be happy, you will swim away along the soft trails for hours, your imagination alighting everywhere. And if your spirit somewhere deep within you is a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted, each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning. Whether or not you've ever dared to be happy, whether or not you have ever dared to pray. As we enter into worship, we remember that each day is given to us without our asking or deserving. It is simply presented as a gift, and it is up to us to receive it with the gladness that it's worth betokens. And so in this hour of worship, we are reminded to be glad, to rejoice and be glad, because this too is a day which the Lord has made. And so we offer up our voice in song as we sing our hymn number 355. We lift our heart in thanks. You can't do better than that. Shall we join together in hymn? Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Faces I see most days, some days, no days, and yet you are here. And I think you're here not so much for me, but for a grand moment that's about to take place. Our character school has been studying beginnings. And it took as its touchstone the familiar biblical story, but expanded on that, enlarged upon it, pulled it apart, stuck its nose inside, looked around, wondered. And it wandered through a poem that you'll be hearing this morning. But you'll be hearing it in tandem with music, because there's a great ballet. You're going to see a ballet. You're actually going to see a ballet. And it's a ballet called La Création du Monde. It was written, composed by the wonderful French composer Darius Milhaud. And he took his music from his experience of American jazz, spent and bent through the African stories of creation he learned. And so you'll get the poem written by James Weldon Johnson, which is the story of creation, but written through the lens of African American experience. The music about the creation of the world that comes from a whole continent refracted through the lens of American jazz, and you'll see dance. From our own wonderful member of corps de ballet at Grand Rapids Ballet, Connie Flax, and her wonderful partner, Ednis Gomez. But most important, our own children will be there in body to give you the forest, the fields, the animals, and the glory of creation itself. And so I'd like to make sure that Ms. Lauren is ready back there with the music. She's ready. She's going to bring down all the lights, and I do mean all of them, so you can hear the music. And then the lights will begin to come up, and you will be a part of the creation of the world. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hand. And God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set the sun a-blazing in the sky. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered that into a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And God said, "That's good." Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head. The earth was under his feet, and God walked. And where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped, looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands and the thunders rolled and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed, and the pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out his arms, the lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm and waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hands, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at the sun, and he looked at his moon, and he looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river, he sat down with his head in his hands. God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and it became a living soul. Amen and amen. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel very nourished by that. And the rainbow gets to stay with us all the way through the service. I am grateful to Dana and the rest of the helpers in Character School for assembling our children, and for Connie for choreographing them, and for Edna for joining her as a beautiful pair of pas de deux. We are blessed in ways we did not know we were. But I'm especially grateful to James Weldon Johnson for a poem, and to Darius Milhaud for a ballet that together, unlikely partners though they were, gave us a moment of beauty and truth. Wow. So I'm doing Psalms this year. It's a discipline to which I have given myself as I prepare my messages, which means I don't know what I'm going to run into until I run into it. Except this week, I have stepped outside of the order. I've done Psalm 1, 2, and 3. I'm doing Psalm 104 today. Why? Because it is a creation psalm. It's a long one, so I'll only give you part of it. And the part that I wish to give you is in segments. It begins, Baraki nafshi et Adonai Adonai Elohei gadal tama od hod v'chadar lavashta. Bless God, O my soul, O God, O God, O God, you are very great. You are clothed in glory and majesty. I love the next line. Atev or b'shalma note shamayim vayariach. Wrapped in a robe of light, you spread the heavens like a curtain. Really anthropomorphic, but what a powerful and immense image that is, a robe of light. Spreading out the heavens like a curtain. Who took a shower this morning and threw the curtain across the rod? That is the sensation. And then the psalmist goes on, and here are some verses. Who makes the clouds his chariot, who strides on the wings of the wind, who makes winds messengers, fiery flames servants, who has established the earth on its foundations so that it shall never totter, who makes the grass grow for the cattle and herbage for labor to get food out of the earth. I love this. Who makes wine that cheers the heart, oil that makes the face shine, and bread that sustains life. Is it any wonder that the two most common blessings in the Jewish tradition are those for wine and bread? All of them, it says in the psalm, look to you to give them their food when it is due. You give it to them, they gather it up. You open your hand, they are satisfied. You hide your face, they are terrified. You take away their breath, they turn again to dust. You send back your breath, they are created again. I want you to pause on that notion. They are created again. I think that aligns with the words you can see from Samuel Beckett at the top of your order of service. The creation of the world did not take place once and for all, but takes place every day. Marcel Proust said exactly the same thing. Maybe Beckett stole it. The creation of the world did not occur at the beginning of time. It occurs every day. And did we not hear Mary Oliver say the same thing? This is the theme I want to lift up this morning. But I can only do that if I invoke the spirit of our own ancestors, whose names, known and unknown, gave this place its walls, its roof. And here at the end of the beginning of another year, I look to them and to that tradition to remind me that we cannot proceed through life without the dead being with us and giving us their blessing. I lift up the names of those last week and this, of Elizabeth Collins, Maynard Brackney, Betsy Horning, Harry Luton, Stephen Carr, Barbara Gallmeyer, Louise Harris, Patricia Blackburn, Kay Ming Sun, Jamal Thorne, Tom Evans, Edward Smith, Walter Bergman, all these and more who in their lives enriched this house and gave its spirit life. And so we pray, and I pray every week, El Malei Rachamim, Sholchein Barachamim, God filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekinah to the souls of our beloved and our blameless who went to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are a source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally. Bind their souls among the living, and through us and to you, and let they rest in peace, and may we be at peace, and let us say, Amen. Thus blessed I say, Lashana Tova, New Year. To a good year, it means in Hebrew. Jewish New Year, 5773, I believe, always comes at this time of year. And so this year does Islamic New Year. Muharram is today. So we should wish Eid Mubarak to all of our Islamic friends. Today is the new Islamic year. But that's not always true. They use a lunar calendar, so next year it'll actually be in the middle of September. Of course, there's Asian, sometimes called Chinese New Year, but that always takes place around midwinter for all of us. And I did some research. If you look hard enough, you can find New Year happens just about every month of the year for some culture somewhere. But I think it is a touch ironic, and I think wise, that we feel a sense of beginning at this time of year, just as nature is, say, closing up shop. Isn't it weird that we should call this the new year when all the leaves are falling off the tree? It's a little bit like arriving at a party to help clean up. Or maybe it's not. Because we know that a beginning has to have an ending before it. There is no beginning unless we bid farewell to what went ahead of that. Beginnings and endings are inseparable. A day has to end before a new one begins. Seasons must give way to seasons. That simple fact, among many simple facts, is really quite momentous when you think about it. Beginnings require endings. Endings require beginnings. Denise Levertov, a great British poet, mused on this theme in one way when she said, "Was there some moment dividing song from not song? When does the dewfall begin? When does night fold its arms over our hearts? When is daybreak?" Endings and beginnings forever entangled, entwined in ways that we can only notice them after they have happened. We can never say, "Oh, there it is." Is twilight when the sun touches the horizon, or below it, or when the light has vanished, or when it appears? Who knows? The fun part is that you and I, we don't think about these things very much. We are slaves to our clocks. I had to watch my phone, make sure I got all my cues right. I'm watching the screen of my life, which isn't my life, when all around me is this poem telling me to look up, look around, notice. And who does that better than anyone else? Children. They notice things that we adults tend to forget. We knew them once, we forgot them. But every now and then a child comes along and reminds us of what fools we adults are. My mother was fond of telling this story of a time when I was very young, say 4 years old at the very most. And she noticed I'd put my left foot on my right shoe, on my left shoe on my right foot, my right shoe on my left foot. And she said to me, "Darling, you put your shoes on the wrong feet," to which I answered, "But these are the only feet I have." Sometimes we adults need to be reminded of what we forget. They are the only feet I have. Many years later, when we were parents, and we had a young one about the same age, our oldest now, my wife was cleaning his ears, as parents are wont to do, got the little Q-tip out, and happened to make the observation as she was doing this, "Darling, you have a lot of wax in your ears." And he said, "How many do you see?" We forget how ambiguous our language can be. From its origins, we of the liberal faith have had the notion that children are not merely vessels to be filled with wisdom, but had wisdom of their own that needed to be honored, lifted up, even learned from. One of my spiritual ancestors, William Ellery Channing, 200 years ago said, "It is the great end in religious instruction is not to give them a definite sort of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth." Think about that. When have we ever done that? It is not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs. I think when we do that, we're actually doing that to ourselves, to find that inwardness that still bubbles forth with the water of life. Here, our character school, of whom you saw a few minutes ago, by which, and of course, the name Character School was chosen in part to say we're not your your grandfather's Sunday school, does exactly this. We explore elemental things, beginnings, endings, ancestors, children. They will find their way to the particular theological doctrines all in good time. Fear not. I tell people that religion and sex can be taught two ways, at home or on the street. And we help them find a home here so that they know what to do when they learn it on the street. The creation story that you heard a version of this morning is but one story of beginnings, like one story of new years, told and retold, embellished, enlarged. That poem you heard from the Harlem Renaissance is just the most recent version, but the psalmist was writing his own version too. I presume it was he, it could have been she. We do not know who wrote the Psalms. And of course, the music was French music based on jazz, reflecting on African stories of creation. There are as many beginning stories as there are cultures to have them. I happened upon another in my research this week. The best part of sermon writing is not the writing, it's the reading. I wish I could show you all the things I discovered. I warn you, are we all grown-ups in this house? There is a vulgarity at the end. One, just warning you, you can take it. It's endemic to the story. You have to hear the word or it doesn't have the same punch. This is written by Sherman Alexie, who was working with Native American creation stories, creating his own version. Here it is. Coyote, the trickster god, creator of all of us, he says, was sitting on his cloud the day after he created Indians. Now, he liked Indians and liked what they were doing. This is good, he said. And he said it to himself, but he was bored. He thought and thought about what he should make next in the world, but he couldn't think of anything, so he decided to clip his toenails. He looked around and around his cloud for somewhere to throw away his clippings, but he couldn't find anywhere and got mad, and he started jumping up and down because he was so mad. Then he accidentally dropped his toenail clippings over the side of the cloud, and they fell to the earth. The clippings burrowed into the ground like seeds and grew up to be white people. Are you ready? Coyote looked down at his newest creation and said, "Oh shit." Another creation story. They don't all sound like poems, and yet they tell stories of value and purpose. And we've all had that moment, haven't we? We adults would do well to allow our inner child more latitude about religion. We're altogether too serious about this. Far from protecting our children from religion, we should be learning about it from them. Listening to the old stories, not caring about what we were told they mean, but listening to them as stories, listening for what the person was trying to say, not what the church was trying to teach. So the study of the Psalms for me has been learning what people are trying to say about their spiritual lives without the intervening interpretation. I discovered, for example, that 20% of the Psalms in the book of Psalms have some reference to creation. And some, like Psalm 104, are the whole story written all over again. You may have noticed in the part that I read you, it was not just like the original Genesis story. First of all, there's God walking around in a robe full of light and all those other things. But he adds more stuff, the author does. The author says of God, "You set the beams of your chambers on the waters. You make the clouds your chariot." Remember that? "You bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the human heart." There's nothing about that in Genesis, I can guarantee. If you read it all the way through, there are gushing springs and birds that sing. There are storks that fly and goats that prance and wild rabbits. There's even a lion and a sea monster in it. And none of it is in Genesis. The author is lifting up the immensity, the variety, the complexity, the immense richness of creation and saying, "Wow, would you look at all this? Isn't it amazing?" Even Carl Sagan would not. When he wrote, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, hey, this is better than we thought?" A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by conventional faith. Is it not true? Every time I read something about science, my jaw drops with majestic surprise. Holy mackerel, I never knew that. For example, and I'm off text now, so be careful. I remember a few years ago, and I read something in some magazine somewhere, that every one of us contains up to 4 trillion microbes in our bodies. Does that gross you out? But in a moment, it makes you think, I'm a planet. There's a world that is me that I don't even know about. I was astonished. We should all be astonished on a regular basis, like children, who when they encounter the world don't come at it with an explanation or even an expectation, but just let it come at them full force, which is what this psalm does. It throws creation right at you, from rabbits and lions, sea monsters and storms. Now, there is some formal teaching this morning. 26 years ago, I had a wonderful older colleague that I invited to dedicate our younger son. And while we were, after the service, while we were visiting as clergy do, he mused on something I had said in the service. And he said that he didn't believe there was a God that created the universe like there was in Genesis, but he thought it was a great insight that somehow everything came from one source. And he said this was important because if you believe there are bunches of gods, you don't care about how it works. You just want to avoid getting hit by lightning, drowned by a flood. You just want to stay out of the way. But if you think it all somehow belongs together, then you begin to wonder, how does the hurricane meet with the river? How do the animals get where they're going? You begin to think about how it fits together, and that is a scientific thought. Not that they had the evidence we have now, but the search for connections, the desire to see the whole in the details that is present in the scientist today and in the psalmist yesterday. And that stayed with me over the years. And in fact, my religious beliefs basically took hold right there. That made something clear to me. It reminded me of when Einstein said, I believe either everything is a miracle or nothing is. And I decided everything was. What I mean is, we cannot know whether this universe we inhabit means anything. We cannot tell for sure whether it has any value of any particular kind, but it's a cinch that if we don't think it does, life becomes unbearable. In fact, if you think life is meaningless, why did you not kill yourself this morning? The very act of staying alive is an act of faith that says, I think there might be some good reason to stay alive. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to bet on it today. Some of you may have learned about Pascal's wager when you were in high school or college. That was the notion that you could either believe in God or not believe in God, but you're better off believing even if you don't know. Because if you don't believe in God and God figures out you don't, you are sunk. I'm going in a different direction. It's not about heaven and hell. It's about this life. If you don't believe this existence matters, if you don't believe your life matters, if you don't believe everything matters, do yourself in. But any day you get up and decide to live, you are not only casting a vote that says, I will think that life matters, you're saying all life matters. Every blessed bit of it. And that, friends, that is the one thing every fundamentalist and scientist can say together. We all believe it matters. And I emphasize believe, because we don't know for sure. And I'm not a betting man. You won't find me at Firekeepers or Gun Lake or anything like that, because I place my biggest bet every morning when I get up and try to do it all over again. I wager that life is worth it. Now, you needed to hear that part. That's the intellectual part, to know the spiritual part. Here comes the spiritual part. You got three parts of this sermon. You got the history part about the theological part over here. Here comes the spiritual. A year later, after our son was dedicated, we were at a conference, a convention, and one part of that convention is a worship service to honor clergy, new ones coming in with their well-scrubbed faces and stars in their eyes, and those of us who'd been doing it for a while would snicker a little bit. Then there were those who were about to retire, and we'd look down the road and said, geez, that's going to be me, but not for a long time. And then there was that moment when we read the names of our colleagues who had died. We stood up, and the man who was conducting the service read a poem. And I was so moved by the poem, the tears began to drop out of my eyes. And it turns out it was a poem based on this same psalm. It's said in part, and the poem is by Ridgely Torrance, they go again to be the dust they tread. These are about my people now. We've read the names of the people I have known and who are now dead. They go again to be the dust they tread. You breathe upon the dust, they rise and are. I don't believe in resurrection, but at that moment I was ready to see my colleagues come back to life. They rise and are. We all know the old funeral words, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And it sure sounds like we come from nothing and go to nothing. But here is the psalmist saying, you go again to be the dust you tread. God breathes upon the dust. You will rise again. I don't believe in resurrection, but I thought that was a vote for hope that I had never heard before. And for a moment, it could have been true. It could have been true. You can choose to think that all is vanity and dust, that it's all meaningless. Or you can choose to believe that everything matters, even the dust. And I think that is our faith. Everyone. Everyone in this room, everyone on the planet, but everyone in this room. Everything that is. From the stars, where every element is formed that lives in us, the tiniest microbes living in our cells that don't even know we exist. It is all dust, and it's all priceless. The great Islamic scholar Al-Ghazali concluded that Allah recreates the world every moment. It is suffused with divinity at every moment. You take in a breath, you are breathing molecules that were in the lungs of Julius Caesar, I guarantee it. When you exhale, those molecules go out and they will find their way into your twice great-grandchildren. Everything is a miracle. That's the only faith I need. And we are creators too. We create our children, we create our art, we create our thoughts. Because if every moment is a miraculous creation, then these words coming out of my mouth that I thought about last week, the thoughts happening in your head as you listen to them, whether you're paying attention or not, the way the cloth wraps around our bodies, the way the light finds its way through the windows, the stained glass, the light itself, the motes and the beams that you can see in the light, every last bit of it is holy, sacred, divine, is miraculous. Oh, that we humans could leave the doctrines and dogmas aside and just believe that much. Just that much. There is something priceless and powerful at stake. Something so real and so distant and so close that all we can do is sing and praise and hope. Because every breath we exhale stirs the dust of our ancestors back to life. Every breath we exhale breathes life into descendants that have not been born. We breathe upon the dust. We breathe upon the dust. They rise and are, and when we go back to dust, they will sing and we will rise up again in their hearts, and everything will be alive because everything is a miracle, and that is faith enough for me for the rest of my life. It's enough for everyone if they dare to sing. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight. Thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Amen and amen.